have quorum, so, and it is time. So I'm going to call this meeting of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee to order, and just to thank everybody for their virtual appearance on my screen, and I guess on a lot of other screens. And you can tell, although we're getting better at this, you can tell which of us spends more of their time on Zoom meetings than others. So some of us are more adept at doing this, but there's a lot of technical backup at the time to support this kind of meeting, and I appreciate all the work that they do. The staff members are with us today who will be able to make presentations. We have delegations with respect to one of the items on the agenda, and again the staff will move the delegations in and out as the meeting progresses. Any member of the public who is watching today who wishes to participate in this meeting can log into oakville.ca or call 905-815-6095, 905-815-6095 to indicate that they wish to participate in the meeting and speak to an item. And if any of us gets cut off during the meeting and is unable to sort of get back on, that would be a good number to try to get yourself into it. The agenda and the materials are all available at oakville.ca and were distributed to us in hard copy on Friday. And so anyone who wants to check with these items on the web, they'll be able to follow the meeting a lot easier if they do that. The participation is as per usual. There will be a presentation by staff. There will be the opportunity to ask questions of staff. There will perhaps then be a presentation by the applicant or the applicant's representative, and again we'll get to ask questions. And then I'll ask if anybody else from the World Wide Web wishes to speak and participate, and give them that opportunity. And then it's back to us to deal with. And again, the voting protocols will be, I'll ask if anyone is opposed to a motion. And I'll just remind everybody again that we are an advisory committee, and the advice that we give today will go to the Planning and Development Council for its meeting of Monday, October the 5th, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. Again, that'll be a virtual meeting. And I'm guessing that telephone number would be one that would connect you to the clerk's department if you as a member of the public wish to delegate at that meeting and speak to any of the items that we are dealing with today. So we'll get into roll call now. So I'll ask Jill, do you have any regrets?
Mr. Chairman, regrets are received from Russ Buckland. And again, we have asked Bob Ferguson to rejoin the meeting.
Yes, so I'll take a roll call now. Russ, we've got regrets from Drew Bucknell. I'm here. Kerry Colborne is here. Councillor Duddick is here. Bob Ferguson, we hope, will be here soon. Councillor Gittings is here. George Gordon is here. Daniela Hampton-Davis is here. Sue Hobson is here. Brenda Sweeney is here. And Jerry Tino's here. So that's the list read into the meeting. We also have some staff support who will come and go as required. So are there any declarations of pecuniary interest with respect to any item on the agenda today? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. The next item is the confirmation of the minutes of our last virtual meeting, which was the meeting of the 18th of August 2020. These were distributed. Does anyone have any comments to make on these? Brenda?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a small correction to spelling on page, not NIMBY-ish. Thank you.
Yes, I noticed that. It was a funny use of that word. Jill, did you get that?
Mr. Chairman, actually, I didn't get the full sound on that, but about the word NIMBY-ish?
Yes, it didn't say NIMBY, it said something else. I'd have to look it up.
It should say NIMBYism, not.
NIMBYism, that's right. Yes. Okay, so we'll just make that as an amendment. So would somebody give me a motion? Brenda, would you like to do that? So Brenda has moved that the minutes with that typographical correction made be adopted. Are any opposed to that motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Okay, down to business now. We have a heritage permit application with respect to 86 Park Avenue, and I guess that'll be Sue, who will presumably appear on our screen shortly. I can see her moving to the podium. There we go.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. The first item we're going to move through today is the heritage permit application for 86 Park Avenue. And I would just note that there were some additional photographs sent out yesterday. I sent them via email, and Jill will be attaching them to the report documents so that they'll be available on the town's agenda system as well. So if anybody has not received those, please let us know. But they were really just photos of the building in general, such as the one that's on your screen right now, to give you some context for the detailed photos that show up in other sections of the agenda package. Okay. So, the property we're looking at is actually part of a very unique structure. Those of you who've been on the committee for a while will hopefully remember this property, which was a farmhouse that was converted into 3 separate legal units without much separation between those units sometime in the 1950s. Collectively, they're designated together under the Ontario Heritage Act and known as the Broxtowe House, and that heritage designation bylaw is included in your agenda package as well, just so that you can understand how the designation has been applied to these 3 different legal units that form part of what used to just be one structure. And so 86 Park Avenue is the portion of the Broxtowe House that we're looking at today. It has the irregularly shaped lot that you can see in your location map and on the screen right now. The heritage designation bylaw, as you can see from the agenda package, does include the fenestration, including remaining historic window sash and frames. And so what we're here today is to look at those windows. You'll recall not that long ago in June, the owners came forward with a heritage permit application that was recommended for approval by the committee and approved by council to construct a new mudroom and garage and to undertake some elements of restoration to the historic portion of the house. And at that time, the windows were proposed to be restored. However, it does appear that the condition of the windows may be poorer than it was originally thought, and so what we are here to look at is a proposed replacement of 11 existing windows with new windows to match, as well as 1 door. And in support of this application, a heritage consultant who is a professional member of the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals in the building specialization has been retained. And that is because it is one of the requirements of the framework that we have to deal with the replacement of heritage windows. As of course, both staff and the committee always take this incredibly seriously, noting that windows are a very integral part of the historic fabric of designated heritage buildings. And so the heritage window replacement guidelines, which were approved by council in 2018, do state that there needs to be a condition assessment checklist completed for every window that's proposed to be replaced, and that needs to be completed by a qualified heritage professional and someone who is not, solely retained for the purposes of selling windows, such as a window salesperson from any number of companies. So there are a number of assessment standards in those guidelines, which are always shared with the applicants who want to go through this process. And they're also available on the town's website for anybody who would like to see them as well. And so generally what we say is that if a window has been evaluated as poor condition and the condition checklists have been submitted, those windows will be considered for replacement. Windows that have been found to be in good or fair condition should be restored as required. And then we also note that modern or inappropriate replacement windows which may be aluminum or vinyl or other inappropriate materials, are always supported for replacement. And I actually would note that I believe several of the 11 windows are actually more modern replacement windows. So poor windows are generally considered to be, windows are considered to be in poor condition if they meet the criteria above. The window is no longer performing its intended purpose and it cannot be made to do so. Maybe the window is missing. Deterioration and damage affects 30% or more of the window and requires replacement materials. And the window shows signs of imminent failure or breakdown. And so, according to the heritage assessment of the windows submitted by the applicant, all 11 windows are either considered to be in poor condition or to be a modern replacement window, which also isn't in good condition either. And the condition assessment recommends that they be replaced. In accordance with the heritage window replacement guidelines, these windows are to match the original or historic ones as closely as possible, noting that some of these windows may not be original, but they certainly are historic. And so as per this requirement, the owners have proposed to install new wood windows, and the product specs are actually attached in the application package. You can see those, I believe, at the end of Appendix B. And so this is the front elevation of the house as it faces onto Park Avenue, and these are the windows being replaced on this elevation, you can see here, and coming around the side. So this is actually the north side of the house, and those are the windows proposed to be replaced, I believe, on that side. I've only just clipped a couple of the windows. There are, of course, many more photographs included in your agenda package. But here on the screen, we have historic windows that are proposed to be replaced, and then we have one of the modern replacement windows that's also proposed for replacement. So heritage planning staff have reviewed the window replacement guidelines as a whole, as well as the condition assessment that's been provided by the applicant as part of the heritage permit application. We do consider the application to have met the requirements of these policies, is generally in keeping with their guidelines, and therefore we are recommending that the heritage permit application be approved. Normally we would have a requirement to review product specifications as part of our staff recommendation, but they are included in the agenda package. If anybody would like to see additional details, please obviously let us know. Otherwise, the staff recommendation is that the heritage permit be approved and that there be 2 years from the date of final approval by council for the owners to complete this work. So I'm happy to try to answer questions. I would note that this is an application that was originally begun by Carolyn before she had to leave. I have not completed a site visit recently to the house, but I am very familiar with the property, having written the heritage designation bylaw and actually doing the CRB hearing for the bylaw at that time as well. But we also do have the 2 delegates registered to assist with those questions that you might have today. Terry Martino, who's speaking as an agent for the property owner, and Kathy Stacy, who is the CAP certified building specialist who's completed the condition assessment. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Just a couple of quick points. In the proposed recommendation, you don't say in there that staff will review the final product before installation or before ordering it. You're saying that's covered, you think that's adequately covered elsewhere?
The product specifications have been included in the heritage permit application. Those are the types of documents that we normally require. If the committee would like to staff to review, additional material, anything in more detail, we'd be happy to take that suggestion. But I believe it's
obviously to the committee, but for myself, I would be happier if you had a continuing involvement to make sure that, assuming we do approve the application, but if new windows were to go in, that you would have some oversight to the product actually being installed.
So on pages 51 and 52 of the agenda package, you can see the specs that have been provided by Ridley Windows that show each window's breakdown design, so that we can exactly see how many muntins, et cetera, that they are, and these windows will be wood.
Okay, and then just remind me, how many of the 11 windows did you say were inappropriate?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, off the top of my head, I can't recall. I believe it's at least 2.
At least 2. So, right, so most of the 11 are appropriate.
Most of the 11 would be, we think, historic to around about the time in the 1920s. The house itself does appear to be quite a bit older than that. The Broxtowe House designation included a really lengthy research report that seemed to indicate that there was a historic farmhouse on this property constructed sometime probably in the 1870s. And then when it was purchased by a wealthy family from Toronto to use as their summer home in the 1920s, the house was extensively renovated, and we think that's when most of the kind of faux Tudor revival elements were added. And we do think that most of the windows were replaced at that time. We don't have any historic photos of the house from a period earlier than that. And then, of course, in the 1930s and 40s, the house was actually used to house young British evacuees from the Second World War. And so there are some photos of the house from that period as well, and they do seem to show windows that still exist today for a number of those historic windows. So I wouldn't call them original, but they certainly are historic.
Okay, good, thanks. And I can welcome Bob Ferguson now. Bob, thank you. You finally made connection. Great. Okay, fine. Questions of Sue? Does anyone have any questions of Sue? Jerry? Open up your mic, Jerry.
Hi, good morning. I would like to ask Sue, some of the replacement windows, some of the existing windows, do we have any documentation as to how they would have looked in the 1920s? I see some flat, unadorned windows on the elevations, but were they all, would you, in your opinion, state that these were as they would have been in the 20s, or is this due to additions and renovations?
Through you,
So what
Mr.
I'm
Chair.
getting at to be brief is if we're going to be replacing old windows that don't have any historic elements to them, can we go back and at least replace them in a manner aesthetically that they would have been similar to what they would have been in 1920?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think there is any, I mean, we do have some general photos of the house from, I believe, a newspaper article from the 1930s, but the level of detail isn't particularly high. I do think that these windows are probably the 1920s windows. On other elevations, meaning other portions of the Broxtowe House, especially 88 Park Avenue, there are some windows that have leaded glass. For example, and those windows are still in existence. They appear to be generally, I'd say, probably installed around the same time as the windows in 86 Park Avenue. But 86 Park, we don't have any evidence of leaded windows in that portion of the house. 88 Park was the library, and it had a lot of light being introduced into that space, and I think that's probably why there were some really large leaded windows in that portion of the house. In this side of the house, which is now 86 Park, there wasn't anything what I would call incredibly unique.
Thank you, Sue. My second question is, were you provided with a cost of new windows versus the cost of the retrofitting the windows? Was there a cost comparison between replacing the windows with new and retrofitting the existing windows, the existing heritage windows? Because I note here that the glass is original 1920s glass, so the glass is 100 years old, the windows are 100 years old. Was there an exercise taken to determine the cost differentials between new and retrofitting?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be a question I think that would be best directed towards the agent for the applicant. It's not a requirement of the heritage window replacement policy for that information to be submitted, so you may want to redirect that question to them.
Thank you, Sue.
Good. Any other questions of Sue? Okay. Thank you, Sue. Now, I know we've got Terry Martino, and we did have, although there she is, Kathy Stacy, I think, who are registered as delegates. Is one of you wishing to speak?
It's Kathy Stacy here. I'm not sure if Terry wishes to speak. I will take questions regarding the window report that I completed for the property.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Does Terry wish to say anything at this stage? He seems to have disappeared again.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear
I'm sorry. Yeah, just thank you, Mr. Chair. Just when you had introduced me, my screen cut out. But good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'd like to thank Susan for her presentation. At this time, I'd just like to make the committee aware that Kathy Stacy, our heritage consultant, is online. You just heard from her, and I have reviewed staff's report and their recommendations with my client. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, perhaps the question might be to you. Did you hear Jerry's question earlier about the cost comparison with respect to repair versus replacement? Or is that one you think Kathy should answer?
I did, Mr. Chair. I heard the question. Thank you. And there was no cost comparison between restoring the existing windows versus the cost of new windows, particularly since, as you'll note in the report, one of the windows that are in the existing is missing, and there are at least two that are not located on the north and south elevation in the report that were not heritage. So we didn't undertake that cost.
Okay. Jerry, did you wish to follow up with that question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Both, I'd like to address both Terry and Kathy. In terms of looking at the Schedule B to the bylaw, page 57, we have a summary of heritage attributes. And in noting that on the other two addresses, the 474, I believe, well, at least the 474 and the 88 Park Avenue, 474 Lakeshore and 88 Park Avenue, do not identify windows, fenestration as heritage attributes. However, this particular portion of the house does identify on page 57 fenestration, including the remaining historic window sash and frames as heritage attributes. And if they are included here, I would think that it would have been nice to see an attempt made to try and restore and retrofit these windows. I'm thinking of the fact that Oakville has a heritage grant system where we give up to $15,000, half the cost of construction of retrofitting heritage elements, which might be something that your client may want to apply for should that exercise be undertaken. But, before considering, removal of 100-year-old windows, I would have liked to have seen, an attempt made to see if they can be retrofitted, or at least, for your client's perspective, to do a cost analysis of new versus retrofitting, especially in light of the fact that there is a heritage grant system provided by Oakville. The other thing is, Kathy Stacy.
Jerry, we were just talking at the moment with Terry. I want to get on to Kathy separately. So your question then to Terry was, why did he not do that evaluation? Is that your question?
Well,
Because the other stuff is discussion, but I want a question or not.
Well, the question is, yes. I would think that if you're going to remove a heritage attribute that's listed in the heritage designation report, that there would be an attempt made to further investigate the option for the committee.
Not wishing to cut Terry off, but I think that's a Kathy question, because if her opinion is that they cannot be replaced because they're beyond restoration, then to do an evaluation of cost would seem to be moot. But anyway, Terry, did you want to say anything there?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, when we consulted with Heritage and put the application in discussions with Carolyn Van Slytenhorst, she directed us actually to Kathy Stacy, who had experience and done other similar projects in Oakville. Reviewed, her work was reviewed within the guidelines which were created by Heritage for the assessment of the windows. And so that's what she simply undertook. And one of them did not include a kind of financial assessment. So I guess that's why it was not.
Okay, thanks, Terry. So if there were no questions of I don't want to put down his professional qualifications, but I think, Kathy, if you would unmute yourself, and I think there may be questions for you, because it's your recommendation here from your professional standpoint that the committee has to consider. And before you get into, I had a very quick question on what is page 24 of our agenda, which is in fact window 1. The question, does the window sash align with the frame with no gaps? You say yes. And then in the next column you say there are gaps. Now that question is answered no for every other window, but this one is answered yes. I just wondered, is that a typo, or it's just, which is it? Is it yes or no?
Okay, sorry, so through you, Mr. Chairman. The windows, some of the reason that there may not be a gap is because there's been, an attempt over the years to sort of try to get them to close, or so there's various, whether it's screws or pieces of wood that are kind of holding these windows in place. So it may align, but they may not be really aligning in terms of that they're functioning correctly as they would have done, when they were first a new window. So it's the yes and no answer.
Yes, okay. So it partly aligns and there are some little gaps. Okay, Kathy, did you want to speak to your report first, and then we can have questions? Did you want to say anything about your general findings?
Sure. So, again, through you, Mr. Chairman, I think that, overall the windows they're just not in great condition. I wouldn't consider these windows to be great candidates for a restoration program. And then to answer Jerry's question about the cost, that isn't a requirement of the report for Oakville. So there's no requirement in there to do a cost analysis on replacement versus restoration. Generally speaking, I will say in my experience that restoration is more costly based on the labor that's involved. However, that wasn't part of this report. Wasn't part of the report is really just a report on the condition of the windows as I found them when I went to the site to do the condition assessment.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Right, questions. Anybody got any questions of Kathy? No, don't have any questions, Kathy. Looks like everybody read and understood your report and understand where you're coming from. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this? Madam Clerk, have you had your phone ringing or?
No, Mr. Chairman, not at this time.
Nobody else out there. Okay, it's now up to us to consider this. What we have is an application that is in accordance with the process that we established some time ago to deal with this terribly difficult question of windows. and to try and formulate it a little bit. And we did that. Staff worked hard, and we worked hard with staff. And council actually approved that process. So we're following that process. It requires the homeowner, the applicant, to engage the services of a professional in that particular field. And based on that opinion, we would make a recommendation. So that's what we've got in front of us right now. So any discussion? Brenda and then Jerry.
I just had, as you were speaking, Mr. Chair, one question arose in my mind, which is for the drawings provided from the supplier, Ridley Windows, on pages 50, well, going through the specific ones on pages 51 and 52. I'm just curious, are those current to the, are those appropriate styles for a home of the 1920s vintage?
Sue, perhaps you could help us with that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, sorry, I'm just trying to flip to those pages. Generally speaking, they are. You know, I think they have tried to replicate the Munton divisions that you know, were already in existence, and those were suitable for the 1920s. If the committee, you know, recommends approval and council approves the replacement of the windows, what they have proposed for the replacement materials and style they're generally fine.
Okay. All right, Brenda. Thank you. Jerry?
I would say that I have a little bit of difficulty with this application because I know that the guidelines are meant to encapsulate an idea and a thought, and I think that it would have been nice to see perhaps the applicant going a little bit beyond the requirements. The fact that there was no cost analysis done of new versus retrofit. I have seen, I believe Kathy Stacy is a member of Heritage Mills, or that's with Alan Stacy. I have seen miraculous restoration of windows from that company. Excellent work in a workshop I attended a few years back. And these windows that are shown in this package aren't deteriorated anywhere near the windows I've seen restored to beautiful perfection. So it's just a little bit unfortunate that you know, that extra step hasn't been taken in this case. And it is, you know, we go back to the fact that fenestration is part of the attribute of the heritage attributes of this building on this particular address, and not included on the other two addresses of this compound. And so it's I'm a bit uncomfortable with where we are, just okaying 100-year-old windows being demolished.
I hear you, Jerry. I guess that's something to think about with respect to our process, but as chair, I'm here to help us administer the process, and the process has been followed in this case, as Sue said in her introductions. Dave, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jerry, I appreciate your comments, and as the chair just mentioned, perhaps that's something that we could look at in terms of a work plan, or to see if our regulations require updating. However, in this case, it appears that the applicant followed the rules that are in place, and so I appreciate the concern, but I think we'd have to work at that with staff moving forward.
Thank you, Dave. Any other comments or discussion? For myself, I would like to see that sort of piece of boilerplate that we often have in the recommendations that said staff to review the actual materials. I know we've got drawings and specifications, but an awful lot can happen between the shop and the delivery. And I would kind of want to maybe see that. If anybody agrees with me and anybody is prepared to make a motion for the staff recommendation, they could invite Sue perhaps to include that or not. It's up to you, it's not up to me. Is anybody rising to the bait on that? Does anybody want to give me a motion? Okay, Dave, and would that motion include Sue having staff having a continuing involvement in the final approval of the materials?
By all means, I think we've included caveats like that in the past, not to add a lot of time or anything else, but just to make sure that they are as proposed.
Yeah. Sue, have you got that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can definitely, I don't have anything written, but we do, as both you and Councillor Giddings have noted, we have relatively standard language that can be added that would, require the applicants to submit all final specifications prior to installation, and staff are happy to review the windows themselves as well.
Okay, that's good. I feel a lot more comfortable about that. Okay, so we have a motion now from Councillor Gittings to approve the staff recommendation, which is not the draft that you saw in your package, but has that third item in it with respect to the staff approval. Is anyone opposed to that motion? I see one. I see no others. The motion is carried. So thank you very much, everybody. We move on now to item 4B, which is a notice of intention to demolish a barn at 4022 4th Line, and that is Sue again.
Okay, yes, thank you. This is an interesting property. It's currently listed on the Oakville Heritage Register as a property of potential cultural value or interest, and it's listed for the farmstead, including outbuildings. And so that's why when the owner came to us with concerns about needing to remove the barn, we are required to go through the notice of intention to demolish process. But the owner clarified that at this time he's not seeking to demolish the farmhouse or the residence on the property, which is still occupied by tenants. And so what we needed to do in order to address the question of whether or not this barn could be demolished was first to look at whether or not it was a cultural heritage landscape, because that impacts the entire property, and then to look at the barn individually. The property itself, as you can see from the location map, is quite large, but the area that we're actually dealing with is just a small fraction of this property, because most of the land that you can see kind of grayed out here is actually marsh and wooded areas as well. There's I believe a couple of photos later on that we can see. I would like to just note that the staff report, when it was written and published, the timelines of the Ontario Heritage Act had been suspended by something called Ontario Regulation 7320, which put on hold a lot of the timelines and deadlines in various pieces of provincial legislation during the pandemic. As of September 14th, we've been informed that the timelines of the Ontario Heritage Act are now back in effect. And so all clocks start ticking from this date forward, meaning that the application now does have a deadline. It must be addressed within 60 days, which is November 13th, but we obviously have plenty of time. So when we receive a notice of intention to demolish, the evaluation of the potential cultural heritage resources greatly influenced or is required by a number of pieces of provincial legislation that I think we're all generally familiar with: the Ontario Heritage Act, the Planning Act, the Provincial Policy Statement, and the Gross Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And it's the PPS, the Provincial Policy Statement, that flat out says that significant built heritage resources and significant cultural heritage landscapes shall be conserved. And so Then, of course, our Oakville's Livable Oakville Plan speaks to the conservation of cultural heritage landscapes, and the town also has a separate cultural heritage landscape strategy, which we've been working on implementing since 2014. So this property was included in the Phase 1 inventory, so it was one of 63 properties that was looked at in 2014, 2015. The inventory report that came out of that is attached in your agenda package. It was deemed to be a low priority property at that time. And so because those reports completed through the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy, the inventory reports are all very kind of high-level documents because there were 63 of them. We did need to do additional research in order to determine if there was cultural heritage value here. So we needed more information to satisfy the requirements of Ontario Regulation 906, which is what defines cultural heritage value. And so I've just selected a couple of pieces from the staff research report. We did undertake this in-house simply because this isn't part of a proposed development. The barn is coming forward for demolition because of safety concerns from the property owner, who has no intentions of doing anything at the moment with this property, although it certainly may be developed in the future. And so my colleague Elaine was incredibly helpful in pulling together much of the detailed research notes that you see in the research report about the history of the property and its owners and occupants. Essentially, what it comes down to is that the property does have some cultural heritage value, but it's not considered significant. And that's what the research report has revealed to us. What we do note is that while we have looked at the question of, is the property a cultural heritage landscape? And the answer there is no. The property contains remnants of a historic farmstead, but it's not enough to read as a single entity or a historically significant cultural heritage landscape any longer. In the barn, which at one time may certainly have been an interesting example of early to mid-19th century barns, it's now in imminent danger of collapse. It's lost so much original and historic material that is no longer a good example of anything. And so neither one of those questions meets the test of Ontario Regulation 906. But what we do note is that we don't have that information sufficient to evaluate the residents. And that's because during our site visit, we were not permitted to actually go near the house. There were some issues, I believe, with the property owner and the tenant that are their own issues to address. But given that the farmhouse was not proposed to be demolished, we didn't proceed with an evaluation of that. And therefore, we're recommending that the farmhouse itself remains listed on the Heritage Register so that we can still do the thorough evaluation that's required to meet the test of the provincial criteria set out in Regulation 906. And so we do think that there may be some associations with the hamlet of Glenorchy that may bear some recognition in the future, even if the house isn't in the end worthy of heritage designation, which we can't say for sure right now. It may be able to, by keeping it on the register, we may be able to include some commemoration of the Glenorchy area and of the owners of this property in the future if the area is to be developed. And so obviously there are a number of photos included in your agenda package. I would say that the barn was in such poor condition. We didn't actually go inside because some areas have collapsed, as you can see. There is still material inside the barn, some of it not smelling particularly pleasant. And this is about as much as we got to see of the farmhouse. And so I've just included that there for context. It is, we think, quite an old building, but it also has been quite altered. And so we're not saying that it is for sure a candidate for designation, but that it is certainly worthy of additional research and review before such time as council should be asked to consider its demolition. which it is not right now. And then, as I mentioned, most of this property is actually completely undeveloped. And so this is the backyard. This is the vast majority of what the property includes, so kind of scrub and marshlands and wooded areas. And so the conclusion of the report before you today is that the barn and the cultural heritage landscape are not considered to have significant cultural heritage value, and therefore they don't merit designation under the Ontario Heritage Act, but that a more thorough examination of the residence should be completed at a future date when we do have full access to that property. And therefore, we're recommending that the residents remain listed on the Oakville Register of Cultural Heritage Value or Interest as the sole remaining feature of the property to be on that register. And that would give staff the opportunity to determine if conservation of the residence is warranted or if there are other alternatives that could be considered at that time. We're also including a standard clause about the owner allowing for the salvaging of features of the barn. So if there are any timbers that come down out of the barn that aren't completely rotted, we will try to make them available if there is anyone who has interest in those materials. And so it's a 4-part recommendation for you today. 1, that the barn be removed from the statement of potential cultural heritage value, that the residents remain listed in the statement of potential cultural heritage value, that we remove the property from any further implementation of the cultural heritage landscape strategy, and that prior to demolition, the property owner allow for the salvage of historic materials if there are any that are desired. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Sue. It's always good when you get these to get all that historical stuff again. I always love to read it. Just to see some of the history of the town. Okay, so that's a fulsome report. I'm glad that Sue, we had a chat about it earlier. The word fulsome gets used wrongly so often. Anyway, are there any questions of Sue about this report and the recommendation being that the barn, which has essentially collapsed, be allowed to demolish, but the rest of the property remains on the register to be dealt with at a future date?
Sorry, to clarify, the residence remains, not the cultural heritage landscape.
The residence remains. Jerry, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Sue, it was a delight to read this report. As Drew mentioned, it's always nice to have the historic tidbits. I wanted to, and to see the happy event that King's College, or across the street from this development, is named, retained the name of what used to be U of T, which were the original landowners of the site, the University of Toronto, that was called King's College at one time. So that was a happy note through this reading of the report. Sue, I have just a few things to say. So what I understand is that you in the Heritage Planning Department will look at the condition of future, or will be involved with the conditions of future development of the site, and we'll look at the potential branding opportunities of this area related to trying to bring bridges and links to the hamlet of Glenorchy, should there be evidence of such. This is what I understand.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, we would retain definitely a stake in any development applications that come forward specifically for this property. But I would also note, just in a general context, heritage planning staff also provide historic street names for developments generally in this area, whether or not there's a historic property located within a development area. There are a certain amount of historic street names that are required, and so commemoration of Glenorchy and of the historic property owners of this area will certainly be considered through future developments, regardless of this property status.
Thank you, that's good news. The other points I wanted to address was on page 85, I haven't seen this, I've driven by the property, but I didn't see the lovely row of pines, and in your future look at the potential designation of this house when you do have an opportunity to go in, as we are retaining, you're suggesting to retain the residents on the list of the Oakville Register, would it be would you be able to look at the placement of these pines in relation to the house, potentially for designation of the two together?
We can certainly look at that, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have to say. Lovely report. Thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Jack.
Honestly, Elaine
Mr. Chairman,
deserves a lot of the credit for the interesting historic material, so I just want to make sure credit is given where credit is due. She's a wonderful researcher.
She did well. Any other questions of Sue? Okay, thank you, Sue. Madam Clerk, have we had anyone phoning in indicating they wish to speak to this?
Mr. Chairman, there are no delegations.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so it's down to us for discussion or a motion. Don't all jump in at once. I mean, Jerry?
I'll move the motion.
I'd be happy.
Okay,
to.
thanks, Daniela. Daniela beat you to it, Jerry. Okay, Daniela has moved the motion that appears in your package that essentially takes the barn off the registry, but it leaves the house on the registry. So that's the later date. Okay, so that's the motion. Are there any opposed to that motion? Seeing none, I declare that motion carried. Thank you very much, everybody. I don't see any information items unless there are some late ones. Nope. So the date and time of our next virtual meeting is Tuesday, the 13th of October, and we did get an email from the clerk's department that listed the next couple of 3 meetings, and it invited us, those of us who can click things, which I'm quite good at clicking things. Sometimes what happens isn't entirely what I expected, but I can click. And it puts it into your calendar, and it gives you all the login information as well, so that you just need to go to your calendar and hit the login information there, and that way you can join the meeting. So that's when our next meeting takes place. If there's no other business, I would call for a motion to adjourn. I think Brenda wanted to make that motion to adjourn. Okay, we'll give Brenda the credit for the motion to adjourn. So I thank you all again for the gift of your time this morning, and it's been wonderful to see you. And we'll look forward to seeing you again on the 13th of October. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.